She threw herself in front of the horses. Not to the side, not waving her arms from the fence. She stepped directly into the path of 4 moving animals, and she did not flinch. "Stop!" Her voice cut across the yard like a blade. "Don't you get in that coach, Mr. Hawthorne. Don't you dare." The horses reared. The driver cursed. Colton Hawthorne grabbed the doorframe to keep his footing and stared at the heavy-set woman standing in the dirt with her apron still on, and her hands raised, and her eyes carrying something he had never once seen in 3 years of knowing her. Pure, undiluted terror. "He's already inside that coach," she said, breathing hard. "And if you ride with him today, they will bring you back in a box. If this is your first time here, welcome. And if you've been with us for a while, you already know what we do. We tell stories about the people nobody saw coming. The ones who got passed over, pushed aside, written off. And what happened when the world finally couldn't ignore them anymore. This is one of those stories. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss what we put out. And drop a comment below telling me what city or state you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that courtyard. Because Lillian Brooks is still standing there between those rearing horses, and Colton Hawthorne just realized that the most important conversation of his life is happening with a woman he has never truly seen. Colton Hawthorne had not survived 20 years of frontier business by being slow to read a room. He had built his cattle empire on instinct as much as intelligence. The instinct to know when a man across the table was lying, when a contract had a clause that would destroy him, when the weather was about to turn, and the herd needed moving before anyone else saw the clouds coming. He had been wrong sometimes, not often. But the cost of being wrong out here was not a bruised reputation or a lost deal. The cost of being wrong out here was everything. He looked at Lillian Brooks standing in the dirt between him and that coach, and he made a decision in under 3 seconds. He stepped back from the door. "Get the horses settled," he said to no one in particular, his voice carrying the flat, unhurried authority of a man who expected to be obeyed. He didn't wait to see if anyone moved. He walked directly toward Lillian, and when he reached her, he lowered his voice to something that didn't carry past the two of them. "Walk with me," he said. "Now, don't look at the driver." She fell into step beside him without a word. They moved away from the coach, away from the hands who were pretending not to stare past the water trough. And Colton kept his face easy and his pace unhurried, because there was a man sitting on that driver's seat who was watching every move he made, and he was not going to give that man a single thing to report. When they were far enough away, he stopped. He faced her. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning. Leave nothing out." Lillian pressed her hands together in front of her apron. Her knuckles were white, but her voice when she spoke was steadier than he expected. "Last night," she said, "after supper, I was finishing the washing in the kitchen. The back window, the one near the woodpile that sticks and won't close all the way, I heard voices from the side passage." "Whose voices?" "Mr. Gideon's," she said. "And a man I'd never seen before. Heavy coat, no ranch badge. He came in from the south gate after dark, because I saw him cross the yard from the kitchen window before he went to the passage." Colton said nothing. He kept his face perfectly still. Gideon Voss, his business partner of 6 years. The man who had sat across from him at every major negotiation since the Denver trading agreement. The man who knew the account numbers, the investor names, the legal structures, the asset valuations. The man who had shaken his hand on a cold December morning 6 years ago and said, "I will not give you cause to regret this," and Colton had believed him. Had believed him every single day since. "What did they say?" Colton said. "They were talking about the mountain road," Lillian said. "The north section past the Dalton Pass. The stranger said it was the right place because of the drop. He said at that part of the road the cliff comes up fast with no railing, and a coach going over wouldn't be found until spring." Colton thought about the Dalton Pass road. He had traveled it 30 times if he had traveled it once. He knew exactly the section she was describing. A sharp curve where the road narrowed to barely the width of a coach, and the ground fell away on the right side into a ravine 200 feet deep. He had always told his drivers to slow down at that section. He had always thought the danger was the road itself. He had not thought to consider that the danger might be the driver. The stranger needed the route timing confirmed, Lillian continued. He needed to know exactly what hour you'd be passing that section. And Mr. Gideon? Her jaw tightened. Mr. Gideon gave it to him. He said you always push to make time on the first leg. He said you'd reach Dalton Pass between 10 and 11 in the morning. The coach was scheduled to leave at 6. Colton did not look at the sun. He did not need to. It was just past 7. 3 hours. There's more, Lillian said. Tell me. After you were gone, after you were dead, the way they talked about it, like it was already a thing that had happened. Mr. Gideon said he had papers ready. Documents showing you'd sold your shares in the company to a holding group in Denver before you died. Everything signed. Your signature already on them. She paused. I don't know how they got your signature, but they had it. The holding group, Colton said. Did they name it? No. But the stranger said Mr. Gideon would have full operating control of the company within 60 days. And the property. She stopped. Started again. The property here, the ranch. They said it would transfer under a clause in the original company agreement. Something about the senior partner's estate, dissolving back to the active partner in the absence of a will. Her eyes came up to his. Is that true? Does that clause exist? Colton said very quietly. Yes. He had written it himself, 6 years ago. At the beginning when the company was new and the risks were high, and he and Gideon had agreed that if either of them died, the business needed to continue without going dark during a legal dispute. It had seemed like the responsible thing to do. The protective thing. He had handed Gideon Voss everything he needed to profit from his murder, and he had done it himself 6 years ago, and called it good business practice. One more thing, Lillian said, and he could hear in her voice that this was the part she had been most afraid to say. They talked about a person inside the ranch. They didn't say a name. But the stranger said their inside man had confirmed there were no attorneys outside of Mr. Carlyle who had access to your estate documents. That landed differently than everything else. Benjamin Carlyle was Colton's attorney. Had been for 6 years. There were things in Carlyle's files that existed nowhere else. Private land arrangements, contingency plans, the terms of certain agreements that Colton had kept deliberately quiet. The only way to know what Carlyle's files contained was to have access to them directly. Which meant someone on this property had either gotten into Carlyle's office or had gotten into Colton's own study. Someone who walked these grounds every day. Someone who ate at this table. Someone who had been here long enough to know how things worked, who trusted whom, what could be moved, and what would be noticed. Colton looked at Lillian. How long have you known something was wrong? She didn't hesitate. Weeks, she said. Strange men coming after dark. Papers appearing in places they shouldn't be and disappearing before morning. Mr. Gideon asking questions about your schedule that didn't make sense for what he was supposed to be handling. Little things. Nothing I could have explained to anyone. Nothing anyone would have believed coming from me. A brief bitter note in her voice. Nobody asks what the cook noticed. But you noticed. I always notice, she said simply. When people don't look at you, you spend a lot of time looking at them. He held her gaze for a moment. Then she reached into her apron pocket and held out a small folded piece of paper, worn soft at the creases like it had been handled many times through a long night. After they left, she said, I went to the passage. I know I shouldn't have. But I went, and this was on the ground just inside the door. I think it fell from the stranger's coat when he was leaving. Colton took it, unfolded it. A list. 8 names in a tight economical hand. His own was 4th from the top. Beside each name a number. Beside his name the number read $4,000. He stood there and looked at that number for a moment. $4,000. That was the price Gideon Voss had placed on 20 years of Colton's life. On every dawn he had risen before his men. Every winter he had kept his herd alive through conditions that broke other ranchers. Every hand he had shaken, every risk he had taken, every honest dollar he had earned and reinvested and built upon, until he had something that mattered. $4,000. He folded the paper and put it in his own coat pocket. You carried this all night, he said. Yes, sir. And said nothing to anyone? No, sir. Why? She looked at him directly. No hesitation and no apology in it. Because I didn't know how far it went. I didn't know who else was involved. I didn't know who I could trust. She paused. And because you've been a fair man, Mr. Hawthorne. You've never treated me cruel. You've never made me feel like I was less than what I am. Another pause, shorter. There's not so many of those in this world that I can afford to let one get killed on a mountain road when I might have prevented it. Colton looked at her for a long time. He thought about the 3 years she had worked in his kitchen. He could count on one hand the direct conversations they had shared. She had always been there. Meals appearing, floors clean, the kitchen running without complaint or drama. And he had accepted it all without much thought. The way you accept the sun coming up as a thing that simply happened and required nothing of you. He had not seen her, and she had seen everything. He turned and raised his hand. Across the yard, Wyatt Mercer straightened immediately and came toward them at a walk that was almost a run, but not quite, because Wyatt understood the importance of not looking urgent. Wyatt Mercer had been Colton's foreman for 7 years. Lean, hard, quiet in the way of men who said what they meant and nothing extra. He read situations the way other men read newspaper headlines, fast and complete, the essential information absorbed in a single pass. He reached them and looked at Colton's face and said nothing. He just waited. The driver, Colton said. 6 weeks. Came through Henderson's livery. Pete Reardon vouched for him. Wyatt's face didn't move. That's right. Has Reardon ever had any business with Gideon Voss that you know of? The stillness that came over Wyatt's eyes was answer enough before he spoke. February, he said. There was a harness delivery. I didn't order it. Saw the ledger entry and assumed it came through the Denver account. It didn't come through the Denver account, Colton said. No, Wyatt said quietly. I expect it didn't. The driver is connected to Reardon. Reardon is connected to Voss. The plan is Dalton Pass, 10 to 11 this morning. Colton said it without heat, laying it out in order, like he was listing supplies for a cattle drive. We have approximately 2.5 hours. What do you want to do? I want all of them, Colton said. Not just the man at the pass, not just the driver, all of them caught in the act with witnesses, with no route of escape and no room for legal argument afterward. He let that sit for one beat. Which means I have to get in that coach. Wyatt absorbed this. And ride to the pass. And ride to the pass. That's a considerable risk. It's a calculated one. If I don't get in that coach, the driver sends a signal and Voss disappears into Denver before noon. The man at the pass vanishes. The documents get destroyed. And I spend the rest of my life knowing there are men out there who tried to kill me once and will try again when the moment is right. Colton shook his head once. I will not live like that. This ends today. Wyatt looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Lillian with an expression that was not quite an apology, but was the closest thing to one that Wyatt Mercer was capable of. Then he looked back at Colton. I'll need 45 minutes to get men in position on the ridge. You have 30, Colton said. Take Burl and take Henderson's 3 men, the ones who have been with us since before Voss came on. Nobody new. Nobody whose loyalty I can't account for personally. He paused. The inside man is still on this property, and I don't know who it is yet. So nothing gets said to anyone who doesn't absolutely need to know. Understood. Wyatt pulled his hat down. And the driver. He stays exactly where he is. Burl will keep him company, casual, friendly, nothing suspicious. Let him think everything is running on schedule. Colton's voice was level. Let all of them think that. Wyatt moved. Colton turned back to Lillian. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Part fear, part something quieter and more complicated underneath it. You're not going back to the kitchen, he said. Sir, if there's someone in this house reporting to Voss, they may already know you were at that window last night. I want you somewhere they can't reach you. He thought for a brief moment. The room above the North Grain storage. Supply inventory room. Go there. Stay there until I send Wyatt for you. My children are already in town, she said. At the schoolteacher's house. I sent them yesterday morning. A pause. Something felt wrong. I didn't want them near the property. He stared at her. She had moved her children before she had the full picture. Before she was certain of anything. Operating on instinct and fear, and the quiet, careful intelligence that nobody around here had ever bothered to notice she possessed. She had already protected the most important thing in her life before she came to protect him. "How did you know?" he said. And he wasn't asking about the conversation in the passage anymore. He was asking about all of it. The weeks of watching, the small things she'd cataloged and held and carried alone. She was quiet for a moment. "My husband was a good man," she said. "But before he died, he got mixed up with people who made promises that sounded right and weren't. I watched it happen piece by piece, and I told myself I was seeing things, and I stayed quiet because I didn't want to cause trouble." Her voice didn't break. It just went very flat and very still. "He died because of those people, and I didn't say a word in time to stop it. I swore I wouldn't do that again." The yard was quiet around them. Somewhere beyond the fence line, a meadowlark called and fell silent. Colton said, "I'm sorry about your husband." "Thank you," she said, simply, without performance. "When I come back," he said, "I would like to speak with you about a number of things, about what you observed these past weeks, about certain arrangements I think need to be reconsidered." He paused. "There is a position in this operation that has gone unfilled because I haven't found the right person for it. Supply accounts and ranch inventory. It requires someone with a precise mind and the ability to notice things others overlook." Another pause briefer. "I believe I've found that person." Lillian looked at him steadily. The expression on her face was not gratitude exactly. It was something more careful than gratitude, the look of a woman who had learned not to count on things before they were certain. "Come back first," she said. "Then we'll talk." He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." He checked the revolver at his hip, settled his coat, turned toward the coach, and walked across the yard at the pace of a man who had nothing on his mind but a business meeting in Denver, because there was a driver watching him cross that yard, and the driver was going to report on what he saw, and what Colton needed him to report was that everything was normal. The driver sat easy on his seat, his hands on the reins, his face forward, not looking at Colton, not looking at the tack room where Wyatt was already moving, not looking at the north pasture where Burl Dawson was cutting quietly away on a fast horse with 4 men behind him. The driver was looking at nothing at all, and that was how Colton knew with absolute certainty that everything Lillian had told him was true. A man with nothing to hide would have glanced over, would have wondered what was taking so long, would have asked if something was wrong. This man just waited, patient and still. The way a predator is still comfortable in the knowledge that the outcome was already decided. Colton put his boot on the iron step. He gripped the doorframe. He climbed in. The door closed behind him with a solid final sound. Through the small window, he could see the courtyard receding as the horses moved, and at the far edge of his sight, just before the gate blocked his view, he saw Lillian standing where he had left her. Both hands pressed flat against her stomach, her face tipped up, watching. She had thrown herself in front of 4 horses at dawn, for a man who had barely spoken her name in 3 years. She had carried a stranger's list through a sleepless night, and stood her ground in a courtyard full of men who had spent years looking right through her, and said the words that needed saying because someone had to say them. Colton settled back against the seat and felt the coach sway beneath him as the wheels found the northern road. His hand rested on the revolver beneath his coat. His mind was already at the pass, already running through what Wyatt would need, already working the angles of how this ended. But some part of him was still in that courtyard, still looking at a woman who had nothing, no power, no position, no protection, no reason at all to stick her neck out for a man. The world had already told her was above her station and had stepped forward anyway. Because it was wrong, she had said. And because she'd had enough of staying quiet about things that were wrong. The road rose toward the north. The Dalton Pass waited somewhere ahead in the morning light, and Colton Hawthorne rode toward it with his weapon ready and a dead man's list in his coat pocket and the absolute unshakable certainty that before this day was finished, every single person who had put his name on that list was going to answer for it. Every single one. The coach hit a rut in the road and Colton's shoulder knocked against the wall hard enough to bruise. He didn't move. Didn't reach for the window. Didn't do anything except keep his hand flat against the revolver beneath his coat and count his own breathing, the way his father had taught him to count it when he was 12 years old, and terrified, and his father had said, "Counting is the only thing that keeps a frightened man from becoming a dead one." 1, 2, 3. The driver above him had not spoken a single word since they left the gate. Most drivers talked. It was a habit of the road, the isolation of a long journey, the natural human need to fill silence with something, anything. Colton had ridden with dozens of drivers over the years, and he could not recall one who had gone a full hour without at least remarking on the weather, or the condition of the road, or asking whether the pace suited him. This man had said nothing. He just drove. 4, 5, 6. Colton looked at his watch. 8:43. If Wyatt had moved the moment he turned away from the yard, and Wyatt always moved the moment he was needed. That was the single most valuable thing about the man. Then there were riders already cutting across the high pasture on the fast route to the ridge. 4 men, maybe 5. Enough to cover the road from above. Enough to close off a retreat if the man at the pass tried to run. If they made it in time. If the driver didn't stop the coach early for some other reason. If there wasn't a second man Lillian hadn't known about. Colton pressed the heel of his boot against the floor of the coach and felt the road moving beneath him and made himself stop thinking in ifs. Ifs would get him killed just as quickly as a bullet. He needed to think in facts. What he knew. What he could control. Fact, the driver was connected to Pete Riordan, who was connected to Gideon Voss. Fact, Gideon had given the stranger a timing window of 10 to 11 at the Dalton Pass. Fact, there was a man waiting at that pass right now who had been paid $4,000 to make sure Colton Hawthorne did not come back down the mountain. Fact. Wyatt Mercer was the best man Colton had ever worked with, and if Colton had told him 30 minutes was enough, 30 minutes was enough. He breathed out slowly. The coach swayed around a long curve, and the quality of the light through the window changed, going thinner and cooler as the road began to climb toward higher ground, and Colton recognized where they were without needing to look. He had traveled this road enough times that his body knew it the way it knew the layout of his own house in the dark. 20 minutes to the pass. Maybe less at this pace. He thought about Lillian. I didn't mean to. He had enough to think about, and she was not a thing he could do anything about from inside a moving coach on a mountain road. But she came into his mind anyway, the image of her standing in that courtyard, with her hands raised and her voice steady, despite the shaking in her fingers, and beneath it, the other image he kept turning over, the one she had given him, without meaning to, when she told him about her husband. He died because of those people, and I didn't say a word in time to stop it. She had watched it happen once and said nothing, and lived with that for however long she had been a widow. He didn't even know how long she had been a widow. He realized. He didn't know her children's names. He didn't know where she had come from before she appeared at his ranch gate 3 years ago asking about kitchen work. He had hired her because she was capable and quiet, and her references were solid, and then he had let her become part of the furniture, and she had spent 3 years noticing every single thing that happened on his property. Watching. Cataloging. Saying nothing because nobody had ever given her reason to believe that what she noticed would matter to anyone. Until last night, when she had decided it mattered enough to risk everything she had left. The coach slowed slightly on a steep grade, and Colton felt the shift in his chest, the way you feel a change before you understand it. Some animal register of danger that the body picks up before the mind catches it. He kept his hand on the revolver. Kept his face neutral in case the driver glanced back through the partition. He thought about Gideon Voss. He did that deliberately because he had been avoiding it, and he knew he had been avoiding it, and he could not afford to avoid it anymore. 6 years. 6 years of partnership, of shared meals, and shared risk and shared credit when the deals came through right. He thought about the winter 2 years ago, when the Denver investors had nearly pulled out, and Gideon had worked 3 consecutive days without sleep to restructure the agreement terms, and had come out the other side, looking 10 years older, and had shaken Colton's hand and said, "We didn't lose it." He thought about the time Colton's horse had thrown him outside of Cheyenne, and Gideon had ridden 6 miles back to find him, and hadn't said a word about the delay to the men they were supposed to be meeting, had just handled it quietly and efficiently, the way he handled everything. I thought about all of it. And then he thought about Gideon standing in the side passage of his own ranch in the dark. giving a hired killer the exact time Colton would be at the most dangerous section of Mountain Road and calling him by name Decker, like they had done business before. Like this was not the first time. The betrayal sat in Colton's chest like a stone he had swallowed, not because it was unexpected. He had processed the shock of it already back in that yard, where 20 years of frontier hardship had taught him to absorb news without showing it on his face. But because it was Gideon. Because some part of him had genuinely believed that what they had built together was real. That the handshakes and the shared risk and the years of honest work alongside each other had created something that could not be bought or corrupted. He had been wrong. He had been profoundly, dangerously, almost fatally wrong. And the only reason he was alive to know it was a woman nobody had bothered to watch. The coach lurched hard to the left, and Colton's hand tightened on the revolver, and then the road smoothed out again, and he breathed. 9:08 by his watch. Less than an hour from the pass now. He heard the driver shift on his seat above a small adjustment of weight, and then the sound of the man reaching down for something. Colton heard it clearly through the thin roof of the coach, the soft drag of something being moved on the driver's board, and his body went completely still. Nothing happened. A long moment passed, then another. The coach kept moving. Colton let out a slow breath. A canteen probably, or a coat being repositioned. The man was not going to make his move until the pass. Whatever instructions he had been given, they almost certainly involved a specific location, the gap in the railing, the curve where the road narrowed, the point where a coach going over the edge would look exactly like an accident. He would wait. They were both waiting. The difference was that only one of them knew what was waiting for them at the other end. Colton thought about the list in his coat pocket. 8 names. His was 4th, which meant there were 3 names above his 3 other men who had already encountered the stranger called Decker, whose outcomes Colton did not know and could not know and would need to find out the moment this was over. It also meant there were 4 names below his 4 men who were still walking around right now without any idea that someone had put a price on them. He would deal with that too. After. Right now, there was only the road and the pass and whatever the next 40 minutes held. He heard the driver speak for the first time since they had left the ranch. Not to him, to the horses. A low, quiet word that brought the pace slightly, the animals responding immediately, and Colton felt the grade steepen beneath the wheels and knew they were in the final approach before the pass. He checked the revolver one last time without drawing it. Full cylinder. Hammer in the safe position. He had fired this gun in anger exactly twice in his life, and both times he had hit what he aimed at, and he intended for this to be a 3rd time if it came to it. He hoped it would not come to it. He hoped Wyatt was on that ridge. The coach climbed, and then it stopped. Not at the curve, not at the narrow section. It stopped a full quarter mile before the place Lillian had described on a wide, flat section of road, where the ground was solid on both sides, and the sudden absence of movement hit Colton like a fist, because this was wrong, this was not the plan, something had changed. He heard the driver climb down. The footsteps came around the side of the coach. The door opened. The man standing there was not holding a gun. He was holding a piece of paper folded once, and his face was the face of someone doing a job and not enjoying it, and wanting very much for this particular moment to be over. "Message came up the road," the driver said. He held out the paper. "Fellow riding down from the pass gave it to me just now, said it was urgent." Colton looked at the paper. Then he looked at the driver's hands, both visible. Nothing else. No weapon, no signal being given that Colton could see. He took the paper, unfolded it. It was written in a hand he did not recognize. It said, "Change of plan. Roads blocked above. Come off at the Miller Fork and take the low route through the creek bed. Come alone. Tell the driver to wait." Colton read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his coat pocket alongside the list. He looked up at the driver. "Who gave you this?" "Fellow on a gray horse," the driver said. "Coming down from above. Said he was with the pass survey crew." "Did you know him?" "Never seen him before." Colton studied the man's face for a moment. The driver was not looking at him with the calculated stillness of someone managing a deception. He was looking at him with the slightly anxious expression of a man who had been handed something confusing and didn't know what his employer was going to do about it, which meant either the driver was an exceptionally skilled liar or something had changed, or both. "The Miller Fork," Colton said. "How far back?" "Quarter mile, maybe less. There's a cut through the pines." "Turn us around," Colton said. He kept his voice easy, the voice of a man making a minor schedule adjustment. "We'll take the low route." The driver nodded and climbed back up without a word. The coach turned on the flat section of road, barely enough room. The wheels grinding close to the edge on one side and started back down toward the fork. Colton sat very still and thought very fast. The message was a diversion. He knew that without needing to reason it through, it was a diversion because whoever wrote it wanted him separated from the coach on foot, on a narrow creek path where the sight lines were short and the footing was uncertain, and there would be no witnesses and no route for help to arrive from above. They had expected him to be alone. They did not know about Wyatt. But Wyatt was positioned on the ridge above the pass road, not at the Miller Fork Creek bed, which was a quarter-mile south and 40 feet lower and invisible from the ridge under the canopy of pine trees that lined the creek the entire way. If Colton went into that creek bed alone, Wyatt would not be able to see him. The coach slowed at the fork. Through the window, Colton could see the cut through the pines, a narrow opening in the tree line, just wide enough for a man on foot with the sound of moving water beyond it. He heard the driver pull the horses up. He had approximately 30 seconds to make a decision. He could stay in the coach, send the driver on some errand, wait for Wyatt to realize something had changed and come looking. But Wyatt was on the ridge and would have no reason to come down until the window had passed, and by then, whoever was waiting in that creek bed would know the plan had failed and would be gone. Or he could get out and walk into the trees, alone, armed, and trust that the man he had relied on for 7 years could read a changed situation and respond to it. Colton opened the coach door. He stepped down onto the road. He straightened his coat, settled his hat, and spoke to the driver in the same unhurried tone he might use to order supper. "Stay with the coach. I'll be back in 15 minutes. He walked into the trees. The sound of the creek came up around him immediately, cool and close, and the light dropped under the pine canopy, and the road disappeared behind him inside of 30 steps. He moved carefully, not fast, because fast was how you missed things, and he needed to miss nothing right now. He kept his hand on the revolver. The path curved left following the creek and opened into a small clearing where a flat rock jutted out over the water, and that was where the man was waiting, not Decker. A younger man, 25, maybe 30. Lean and dark-eyed and wearing a coat too heavy for the weather, his right hand inside the front of it. Standing on the flat rock with the water behind him and the clear intent to have the angle covered before Colton arrived. He had positioned himself well. Colton had positioned himself better, because he had stopped 6 steps into the clearing, which put the trunk of a wide pine directly at his left shoulder, and from where he stood, the man on the rock had a difficult shot, even with the hand inside the coat already on a weapon. "Mr. Hawthorne," the man said. He didn't move. He was reading the situation the same way Colton was reading it, and he was not happy with what he was reading. "I was expecting you earlier." "I took a moment," Colton said. "You were supposed to come alone. I did come alone." "You've got men on that ridge." Colton said nothing. "We knew about the foreman," the man said. "We figured you'd run to him first thing, so we moved the play down here." He shifted his weight slightly on the rock, and the water caught the light behind him, and he said, "You're smart, Mr. Hawthorne. I'll grant you that. But there are more of us than there are of you, and the man on the ridge doesn't know where you are right now." "That's true," Colton said. "So what I'm offering you," the man said, "is a clean end to this. You don't have to know anything more than you already know. You can just—" "Where's Decker?" Colton said. The man stopped. "The list had 8 names on it," Colton said. "I'm 4th. That means Decker's worked 3 contracts before mine and has 4 more after me. So where is he? Because you're not Decker. You're too young and you're too nervous, and a man who's worked 8 contracts doesn't stand on a rock with his hand inside his coat because he knows it telegraphs the draw." The man's jaw tightened. "Decker moved," the man said after a moment. "Change of plans." "No," Colton said. Decker's on the ridge. That's why Wyatt hasn't signaled. Because Wyatt's dealing with something up there that he didn't expect. And you're down here dealing with me, and neither of you know where the other one's situation stands. The man on the rock made a decision. Colton saw it in his eyes before his hand moved. He stepped behind the pine tree as the shot came and felt the bark explode 6 inches to his right and had the revolver clear of his coat by the time the echo died and put one shot into the man's right shoulder before he could cock for a second. The man went down off the rock sideways into the shallow creek with a sound like a felled tree hitting water. Colton moved out from behind the tree immediately, because staying in one place after a gunshot was the mistake men made when they were frightened. And he was not frightened. He was operating, and operating meant moving. He crossed this clearing in 4 steps, put his boot on the man's wrist, where his gun hand was still near the weapon, and kicked it away into the current. The man was alive. Shoulder wound bleeding, but not dying. The shock of cold water keeping him present in a way he might not have been otherwise. He was looking up at Colton with an expression that had abandoned all of its earlier calculation and replaced it with something much simpler. Fear. "Decker," Colton said. "Where on the ridge?" The man said nothing. "You're going to bleed in that creek for another 4 minutes before you answer me," Colton said. "Or you're going to answer me now, and I'll get you out of the water and tied up and alive for the sheriff to collect. Those are your 2 choices. There is no third choice." The man breathed hard through his teeth. "North end," he said finally. "Behind the limestone outcrop above the road cut." Colton was already moving. He came back through the pine path at a run. Hit the road, looked up at the driver who was still sitting exactly where he had left him with the horses and his hands and his expression, all suggesting a man who genuinely had no idea what had just happened. "Fire that gun," Colton said, pointing at the rifle mounted below the driver's seat. "Sir." "That rifle. Fire it now. 2 shots a pause a third. Do it." The driver grabbed the rifle and fired it 3 times into the air without asking another question, and the sound rolled up the mountain, and Colton stood in the road and listened and counted and waited. The signal from the ridge came back inside of 60 seconds. 1 shot. A pause. 2 shots together. Wyatt's answer. "I hear you. I have him." Colton let out a breath he had been holding for somewhere around 45 minutes, and it came out shakier than he would have liked, which was the body's way of reminding him that he was still a man and not a machine, and the body had its own reckoning that happened after the danger passed. He pulled out his watch. 9:57. He thought about Lillian sitting in the room above the grain storage waiting for news. He thought about what she had said when he left. "Come back first. Then we'll talk." He put the watch away. He looked up at the ridge where Wyatt was bringing down a man who had been paid $4,000 to kill him. And he thought about the document in his coat pocket, and the altered breeding records, and the inside man still walking the grounds of his own ranch, and he understood that today's work was not finished, not even close. The man in the creek was one piece. Decker on the ridge was another. But Gideon Voss was still in Denver right now, sitting in his office waiting for news that would not come the way he planned, and someone on Colton's own property. Someone who walked the halls and ate at the table and had spent long enough in that house to know where to look and what to move and when to be invisible was waiting too. That person was still there, and they did not know yet that everything had changed. Colton straightened his coat. He had a plan to get back to his ranch by midday. He had a great deal to say to several people when he arrived, and for the first time since he had climbed into this coach at dawn with a dead man's list in his pocket, Colton Hawthorne felt something settle in him, like the ground finding level after a long storm. Not relief, not yet, because relief was for when it was truly over, but certainty. He was going to bring this down around all of them. Every single piece. Starting the moment he rode back through his own gate. Wyatt came down from the ridge with Decker bound at the wrists and a cut above his left eye that had bled down the side of his face and dried there. And the first thing Decker did when he saw Colton standing in the road was laugh. Not loud, not long. Just a short dry sound that carried no humor in it whatsoever. "You're supposed to be at the bottom of that ravine," Decker said. "I know," Colton said. Disappointed, Decker looked at him with the flat, assessing eyes of a man who had spent a career reading other men and deciding what they were worth, and said nothing more. Wyatt handed the reins of Decker's horse to Burl Dawson and walked over to Colton, and the two of them stood close and spoke quietly while the other men kept their positions. "He had a second man with him on the ridge," Wyatt said. "Young one, maybe 22. Ran when we came over the top. Burl's boy is tracking him north, but I don't think he gets far on foot." "There's another man in the creek bed south of the Miller Fork," Colton said. "Shoulder wound. Alive. Needs collecting before he decides to become someone else's problem." Wyatt absorbed this without expression. "How many total you think Voss hired?" "At least 4 that I can account for. Decker, the creek bed man, the runner from the ridge, and the driver." Colton glanced at the coach where the driver was still sitting with the stillness of a man who had made peace with his situation. "The driver needs to come back to the ranch with us. He's the cleanest thread back to Pete Reardon, and I want that thread intact when I sit down with the sheriff." "When are you planning to do that?" "This afternoon," Colton said. "But first I need to deal with what's back at the ranch. The inside man. That's the piece I can't leave loose." Wyatt nodded slowly. "You have a name yet?" "No, but I have an idea." Colton reached into his coat and pulled out the folded message that the rider on the gray horse had delivered to the driver. He held it out to Wyatt. "Look at the handwriting." Wyatt looked at it. His eyes went still. "I've seen that hand," he said. "So have I," Colton said, "on every supply order that's come through the ranch office in the last 8 months." Wyatt looked up. "Harlan Price," he said. "Harlan Price," Colton said. Harlan Price had come on as ranch office clerk 7 months ago with a letter of recommendation from a land office in Cheyenne and a quiet, efficient manner that had made him nearly invisible in the day-to-day operations of the property. He handled the ordering, the filing, the scheduling coordination. He sat in the office off the main hall 6 days a week and moved paper and said yes sir and no sir, and kept everything running with the kind of frictionless competence that made a busy man stop questioning why something worked and simply be grateful that it did. He had access to the supply accounts. He had access to the scheduling books. He had access to the filing cabinet where Colton kept copies of his legal arrangements. And he had been put there. Colton now understood by the same man who had arranged for Reardon to recommend the driver and for Decker to be positioned on a mountain ridge at 10 in the morning. Gideon Voss had been building this for months, quietly, piece by piece, each piece placed so carefully that none of them looked like what they were until you pulled them all out and laid them side by side. "I want him contained before he knows I'm back," Colton said. "No alarm, no confrontation in the open. I want him sitting in a room with no way out when I walk through the door." "I can have 2 men in the hall outside the office before noon," Wyatt said. "Do it, and keep it quiet. Nobody on the property knows what happened this morning except the men who were with us on that ridge. That holds until I say otherwise." Wyatt pulled his hat down. "And Voss." Colton looked down the mountain road toward the valley below, and the ranch that he could not see from here, but could feel the way you feel, something that belongs to you. Some deep territorial knowledge that ran beneath rational thought. "Voss thinks I'm dead," he said. "I want him to keep thinking that for a few more hours. Long enough for me to have everything in front of a judge before he has time to destroy the documents. You'll need Carlisle for that. Carlisle's already on his way to the ranch. I sent for him before I left." He looked at Wyatt. "Get us moving. I want to be back through the gate before 11. They came back down the mountain in a formation that looked nothing like the quiet departure of a few hours earlier. 2 bound men on horses. Colton riding the gray that Burl had recovered the stagecoach, moving at a pace that the driver had apparently decided not to argue with. The man from the creek bed had been collected from the water shivering and white-faced and considerably more cooperative than he had been when Colton left him there, and he rode with his wounded arm bound against his chest and his eyes on the road. Colton rode without speaking. I was thinking about Harlan Price, sitting in that office right now, filing papers, running through his normal morning routine. Perhaps wondering why there had been no signal from Decker, perhaps starting to calculate what silence might mean. A man in Price's position would have a threshold some number of hours of no word before he decided the plan had failed, and it was time to remove himself from the situation. Colton needed to be back before that threshold was reached. He pushed the pace. They came through the ranch gate at 10:53, and Colton was off his horse before it fully stopped. He handed the reins to a hand without looking at him, and walked directly toward the main house, and behind him he heard Wyatt giving quiet instructions, and the sound of men moving with purpose into positions that would look ordinary to anyone watching from a window. He did not go to the main house door. He went around the side to the kitchen entrance. Lillian was not in this grain storage room above the north barn. He had told her to go there, and he had expected her to go there, and she had not gone there. She was in the kitchen standing at the long work table with a cloth in her hands that she had been twisting without being aware of it. And when the kitchen door opened and Colton walked through it, the cloth dropped from her hands completely. She stared at him. "You're alive," she said. It came out barely above a whisper. "I am," he said. She pressed one hand flat against the work table, like she needed the support. Her eyes were very bright, and she was blinking more than usual, and he recognized the specific quality of that particular stillness as a person who had been holding themselves together by force of will for several hours, and was now in the process of recalculating whether they still needed to. "I told you to go to the grain room," he said, but he said it without any heat in it. "I know," she said. "I couldn't." "Why?" "Because I would have lost my mind sitting up there not knowing," she said. "And because if something went wrong, I wanted to be somewhere I could hear it happen, not somewhere I was hidden away from it." She looked at him steadily. "I'm sorry if that was the wrong choice." "It wasn't wrong," he said. "But I need you to listen to me very carefully right now, because what I'm about to do requires that you stay in this kitchen for the next 30 minutes no matter what you hear. Can you do that?" She straightened. "Yes." "Harlan Price," he said. "Do you know him?" Something moved across her face, a recognition, and behind it something darker. "The office clerk," she said. "Yes, I know him," she said. "He came to the kitchen twice in the past month asking questions about your routine, about when you took your meals when you went to the study, whether you had visitors in the evening." She paused. "I thought it was odd, but I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't connect it to—" She stopped. "I should have told you." "You couldn't have known," Colton said. "I noticed it," she said, and there was something almost angry in her voice, the anger a person directs at themselves when they feel they fell short. "I noticed it, and I filed it away, and I didn't say anything, and that's the same as not noticing." "Lillian." He waited until she looked at him. "You saved my life this morning. Whatever you think you should have done differently, you saved my life this morning. Let that be enough for right now." She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked the cloth up off the floor, folded it once, and set it on the table. "What do you need me to do?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "I need you to stay here and let me handle the next part." He turned toward the kitchen door that opened into the main hall. "Colton." She said his name without the "sir" attached, and it was the first time she had done that, and he stopped with his hand on the door. "Be careful," she said. "Price, is there something in him that isn't right? Something behind his eyes. I noticed it from the first week, and I didn't know what it was, but I know now." He nodded once, pushed the door open. The hall was quiet. His boot steps fell soft on the runner, and he moved past the dining room, past the sitting room toward the office at the far end of the hall, where a thin line of lamplight showed under the closed door. He stopped outside it. He could hear the sound of papers moving inside, the scratch of a pen, the ordinary sounds of a man at work going through his morning tasks without urgency, without any sign of distress. Either Decker had not been due to signal until noon, or Price was better at this than Colton had anticipated. He opened the door. Harlan Price looked up from the desk with an expression of mild inquiry, the expression of a man interrupted at something minor. He was in his middle 30s, sandy-haired and unremarkable, in the way of men who spent their lives making sure they were unremarkable. His coat was clean. His papers were stacked in neat piles. His pen was still in his hand. He looked at Colton, and his eyes registered something very briefly, something that passed through them and was gone so quickly that a man who was not watching for it would have missed it entirely. But Colton was watching for it, and he saw it. It was not surprise, it was calculation. "Mr. Hawthorne," Price said, and his voice was perfectly even. "I didn't expect you back until this evening. Was the meeting postponed?" "Sit down, Harlan," Colton said. Price had not stood up. He was already sitting. But something in the way Colton said it made him understand that the instruction was not about the physical position, and he went very still in his chair and set the pen down carefully on the desk blotter. "I'm going to ask you some questions," Colton said, "and I want you to think carefully before you answer each one. Not because I need the information, I already have most of it, but because how you answer is going to determine whether the next conversation you have is with me or directly with the territorial judge, without anyone between you and the legal consequences of what you've been doing in this office." Price said nothing. "The filing cabinet," Colton said. "Second drawer, the one with the estate documents. When did you first go into it?" A pause. "I don't know what you're referring to." "That's the wrong answer," Colton said. He crossed the room and sat down in the chair across the desk from Price, and looked at him the way he had looked across tables at dishonest men for 20 years. "Try again." Price's jaw worked slightly. His eyes went to the door behind Colton briefly, involuntarily, the kind of look a trapped animal gives the exit, and then came back. "October," Price said. "Who gave you the combination?" "I found it. It was written on the underside of the middle desk drawer." He said it without any particular inflection, as if he was reporting a filing discrepancy. Colton thought about that. He had written the combination there himself 3 years ago, because he was the kind of man who forgot combinations, and he had never thought to move it because he had never thought to question who sat at this desk. "What did you take?" "Copies," Price said. "Nothing was removed, copies only." "Of what?" "The partnership agreement, the will, the land title arrangements, the investor correspondence." He paused. "The attorney correspondence." Carlyle's letters. "Yes." "And you passed those copies to Gideon Voss?" Price didn't answer. "I'm not asking whether you did it," Colton said. "I know you did it. I'm asking whether you're going to sit here and make me prove every step in front of a judge, which will take longer and go worse for you, or whether you're going to tell me the full scope of it now, while there's still something to be gained from cooperating." Price looked at the desk. He looked at his hands. He looked at the pen he had set down on the blotter. He seemed to be performing some internal calculation, adding up what he knew against what Colton might know, trying to determine where the gaps were. He made the wrong calculation. "I want to speak with an attorney," he said. "That's your right," Colton said. "Wyatt." The door opened immediately, and Wyatt stepped in with a man behind him, and that man was not one of the ranch hands. That man was Benjamin Carlyle, Colton's attorney, who had apparently arrived while Colton was still on the mountain road, and who was now standing in the doorway of the ranch office, with a leather case under his arm, and an expression that suggested he had already been briefed on at least part of the situation, and was not pleased by any of it. Price looked at Carlyle. His face finally showed something real, something that went past the careful blankness he'd been maintaining. "Bun Carlyle handles my legal affairs," Colton said. "He is not here for you. He is here because I have some documents I need witnessed and filed before the end of today, and because I need his assessment of what Voss has prepared under the company dissolution clause." He paused. "You should know that whatever Voss promised you when this was over, the only thing waiting for you on the other side of what you've done is a criminal charge for conspiracy in a murder-for-hire scheme. The men who were going to kill me are in custody. They will talk. They are already talking. And every piece of paper you copied from that cabinet is going to be presented as evidence of your participation." Price's carefully maintained composure cracked. Not dramatically. It was a small thing, a fine tremor in the hands he had folded on the desk, a slight unevenness in his breathing. But it was real. "I didn't know anyone was going to be killed," he said. "That's what they all say," Colton said. "I mean it." Something urgent came into Price's voice. "Voss told me it was a business reorganization. He said you were going to be bought out. He said the documents were needed for the transition filing, and you were aware of the process." He stopped, breathed. "I found out about the rest of it 3 weeks ago. I heard him on the telephone at his Denver office when I was there for the filing review. I heard what they were actually planning." "And you said nothing," Colton said. "He knew things about me," Price said. "Things from before I came here. I couldn't—" He stopped again. His jaw tightened. I couldn't walk away from it by then. I was already in too deep. If I talked, everything I'd done in that cabinet came out and I was finished anyway. The room was very quiet for a moment. Carlyle, from his position near the door, said quietly, "Colton, I need 5 minutes with you before this goes further." Colton looked at Price. "You're going to stay in that chair," he said. "Wyatt is going to stand right there. And if you move toward that door or that window, I want you to understand that there are 2 men in the hall who have been waiting since before I got back, and they are not patient men." He stood up and walked to the far corner of the room where Carlyle was waiting. Carlyle opened the leather case and extracted a document and held it out without speaking. Colton looked at it. It was the company dissolution clause. He had read this document before when he and Gideon had drafted it, when he had signed it, when Carlyle had filed it. He had read it 3 times and discussed it with Carlyle and believed he understood it. He had not understood it, because embedded in the 4th subsection in language that was technically legal, but structured in a way that required a careful reading to parse, was a provision he had not seen before. Not a provision that had been there when he signed. A provision that had been added. He looked up at Carlyle. "When," he said. "The amendment was filed 8 months ago in the Denver Territorial Office," Carlyle said quietly, "under a supplementary filing that referenced the original agreement. Standard procedure for minor amendments. It wouldn't have triggered a notification to you unless you were specifically watching the filing registry, which nobody does. What does it say? It says that in the event of the senior partner's death, the asset transfer to the active partner is immediate and not subject to the standard probate review period." Carlyle paused. "Normally, there's a 90-day window during which the estate can be contested. This amendment removes that window entirely. The moment a death certificate is filed, the transfer is complete and legally uncontestable." Colton stood very still. "Voss didn't just plan to kill me," he said slowly. "He spent 8 months building a legal structure that would make it impossible for anyone to challenge the result afterward." "Yes," Carlyle said. "And there's something else. The amendment carries a signature." "Whose?" Carlyle's voice was carefully neutral. "Yours." The word landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water, and the ripples it made went outward in all directions, and Colton stood at the center of them and felt the full weight of what Gideon Voss had built settle onto him all at once. His signature. On a document he had never seen. Altering an agreement he had signed in good faith. Filed in an office he had no reason to monitor. 8 months ago, while he was running his ranch and managing his herd and sitting across tables from Gideon Voss and believing they were building something together. "Can it be contested?" he said. "On the grounds of forgery, yes," Carlyle said. "But I need the original document from the Denver filing office, and I need a handwriting expert to compare it to authenticated samples of your signature, and I need to file an injunction before any death certificate is submitted, which means I need to move today." He paused. "I also need to know who authorized the filing. There would have been a clerk who processed it. There would be records." "His name is Voss," Colton said. "Gideon Voss. He's in Denver right now, and he thinks I'm dead." Carlyle looked at him steadily. "Then we have a window," he said. "A narrow one, but a window." "How narrow?" "If he hasn't received word by midday, he may send someone to confirm. When confirmation doesn't come the way he expects, he'll start to suspect something went wrong. A man in his position with what he's done will have an exit plan." Carlyle closed the leather case. "I need to be on a horse to the telegraph office within the hour. I need to file the injunction before close of business today in Denver." "Then go," Colton said. "Right now. Take Burl's horse, he's the fastest on the property. I'll have everything you need sent to your office by wire before you reach the telegraph." Carlyle moved toward the door. "Ben." Carlyle stopped. Colton said, "The forgery. How good is it?" Carlyle hesitated. "Good enough that it passed initial review," he said. "Someone with access to multiple authentic samples of your signature over a long period practiced this for some time." He paused. "It's almost perfect." "Almost," Colton said. "Almost," Carlyle confirmed. And then he was gone. Colton turned back to the room. Price was sitting exactly where he had left him, which was either obedience or resignation, or some combination of both. Wyatt was watching him with the particular quality of attention that Wyatt brought to everything he considered a risk. Colton walked back to the desk and stood over Price and said, "The signature on that amendment. Did you provide samples for it?" Price looked up at him. The calculation was gone from his face now. What was left was something more honest and considerably less comfortable to look at. "There was a man who came to the ranch in November," Price said. "Voss sent him. I was told he was a document specialist for the company reorganization. He spent 2 days here." He paused. "I gave him access to the correspondence files, the signed letters, everything in the cabinet that had your signature on it." "You gave him 2 days of authenticated signature samples," Colton said. Price said nothing. "And in exchange for all of this," Colton said, "what did Voss promise you?" A long silence. "A position," Price said finally. "Managing director of the Denver office after the transfer. A salary and a percentage." He stopped. "And the thing from before. He said he'd make it go away. The thing, he was never going to keep any of it, was he?" "No," Colton said. "He wasn't." Price nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had suspected for a while, and simply not let himself fully believe. Colton walked out of the office and into the hall and pulled the door most of the way closed behind him. He stood for a moment in the quiet of the hallway with his hand still on the doorframe. He was thinking about the signature, not just as a legal problem. Carlyle would handle that. Carlyle was already riding toward the telegraph. But as a thing in itself, the months of preparation that had gone into it. The document specialist sent in November 2 full months before the stagecoach driver was even hired, getting samples, practicing perfecting a forgery that was almost indistinguishable from the real thing. Gideon had begun planning this before the snow came last year. He had been sitting across from Colton at meals and in meetings and at the negotiating table for 6 months, knowing what he had set in motion, and he had never once, not once, shown a single thing that Colton had been able to read. That was either extraordinary nerve or extraordinary coldness. Colton wasn't sure which one made him angrier. He heard a sound at the far end of the hall. He looked up. Lillian was standing in the kitchen doorway. She had not stayed in the kitchen the way he had told her to. Again. She was looking at him with an expression he was beginning to be able to read, a kind of contained intensity, the look of someone who has been managing fear for hours and has gotten very practiced at keeping it below the surface. "Price," she said quietly. "In the office," Colton said. "He's cooperating now. Did you know," she said, "that he went into your study 3 weeks ago at night? I was up with one of my children. My daughter had a cough, and I had come to the kitchen for hot water, and I saw his lamp in your study window from the yard." Colton looked at her. "I thought he might be working late," she said. "You're allowed in your own study. I didn't—" She stopped. "That was probably when he took whatever they needed for the signature." "Probably," Colton said. "I should have said something." "Lillian." He looked at her directly. "You did say something. You said it this morning in front of that coach, and you said it when no one else was going to. You cannot carry the weight of everything you didn't know in time. Nobody can carry that." She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face shifted, not releasing entirely, because she was not the kind of person who released things easily, but softening around the edges in a way that suggested his words had reached something. Then she said, "There's something else." He waited. "Last night," she said, "before I heard the conversation in the passage, earlier in the evening, I saw Harlan Price talking to one of the kitchen girls near the side yard. A young girl named May who's been here 4 months. She had something in her hand that she put in her apron pocket when she saw me coming." Lillian's voice was very careful now, measuring each word. "I didn't think anything of it at the time. But this morning when I was in the kitchen waiting for you to come back, May didn't come in for her morning shift. She wasn't in her room. Her things were still there, but she wasn't." Colton felt something cold move through him. "Price had someone else," he said. "I think so," Lillian said. "Someone who could move around the house without drawing attention. Someone nobody would question." She paused. "I think whatever she had in her hand was a message, and I think she's already gone. which meant there was a fourth person in this network, and that person was already in motion, and whatever message she was carrying was intended for Gideon Voss in Denver, and it was intended to reach him before Carlisle's injunction did. Colton moved. He went back to the office door, opened it, and looked at Price. "May," he said. "The kitchen girl. Where did you send her?" Price went pale in a way that answered the question before his mouth did. "Denver," Price said. "Last night. She left at midnight on the early freight wagon. She was supposed to go to Voss's office if no word came by morning." Colton looked at Wyatt. Wyatt was already calculating. Freight wagon left midnight makes its first stop in Harmon at 6 this morning, second stop in Alderville at 10. It reaches Denver at late afternoon, Colton said. "If she stays on the wagon..." He thought fast. "But she doesn't have to stay on the wagon. She can send a wire from Harmon or Alderville." "She may have already sent it," Wyatt said quietly. The room went very still. If the wire had already gone, if Voss already knew the plan had failed, then everything changed. An exit plan meant documents, destroyed assets, moved a man vanishing into a city big enough to lose himself in permanently. Colton looked at his watch. 11:22. He looked at Wyatt. "How fast can your best rider reach the Alderville telegraph office?" he said. Wyatt said, 40 minutes if he doesn't stop. "Then he has 35, Colton said. "Get him on a horse right now with a wire for the Alderville office to hold any outgoing messages to Denver under the name Voss or any related business name until further notice. And get a second wire to the Denver marshal's office." He turned back to Price. "I need Voss's Denver address, his office and his residence, both, now." Price gave them. Wyatt was gone before Colton finished writing them down. Colton stood in the ranch office with Harlan Price, sitting bound and cooperative in the chair across the desk, and the clock ticking toward afternoon, and the entire carefully constructed machinery of Gideon Voss's 6-month plan beginning finally to come apart at every joint simultaneously. But it was coming apart in a race, and the finish line was a telegraph wire that might or might not have already been sent. He put his pen down. He thought about the list in his coat pocket. $4,000 beside his name. 8 names total. 3 above his. He thought about what that meant. If Decker was a professional, and this was not his first contract, and there were 7 other names on that list, then somewhere out there were men or their families who already knew what it meant when Decker came calling. Men who had already lost what Colton had nearly lost today. I was not going to let Gideon Voss walk away from that. Not from any of it. He pulled out the list. He looked at the first name above his. He did not recognize it. He looked at the second. He did not recognize it either. He looked at the third name above his, the one directly above, and his hand went completely still. He knew that name. He knew it because he had read it on a deed of sale 18 months ago, when the man in question had sold his land holdings at a price that everyone in the territory said was far below value, sold them quickly and quietly, and then disappeared from the area entirely, and the rumor at the time was that he had taken the money and gone east. His name was Aldrich, James Aldrich. He had owned a cattle operation in the next valley, and he had sold everything he owned at distress prices 18 months ago, or someone had sold it for him. Colton set the paper down on the desk very carefully. "Wyatt," he said, and then remembered that Wyatt was gone. He looked at the man standing in the corner who had taken Wyatt's position. "Get me someone who knows the land registry for the valley," he said. "I need to know who currently holds the deed to the Aldrich property, today, within the hour." The man went. Colton sat down in Harlan Price's chair behind the desk, which felt deeply strange, and looked at the list and thought about a man named James Aldrich, who might have gone east or might be at the bottom of a ravine somewhere that would not thaw until spring. And he thought about Gideon Voss sitting in Denver right now, waiting, not knowing yet whether his plan had worked, or perhaps already running. And somewhere between those two possibilities was a girl named May, on a freight wagon, with a message, and a lawyer on a fast horse, with a different message, and a race between them that would determine whether the next chapter of this story ended in a courtroom or in a vanishing. Colton folded the list, put it back in his pocket, stood up. There was more work to do, and the afternoon was burning, and he had never once in his life let something unfinished stay that way when he had the strength and the will to finish it. He was not going to start now. The land registry answer came back in 40 minutes. The man Colton sent returned at a near-run paper in hand and set it on the desk without a word, because he could read Colton's face well enough to know this was not a moment for preamble. Colton read it. The Aldrich property, 460 acres in the next valley. Good grazing land, water rights on 2 creek tributaries. A solid operation that James Aldrich had built over 15 years was currently held by a Denver-based landholding company called Meridian Valley Partners. Colton had never heard of Meridian Valley Partners, but he had heard of the attorney who had filed the transfer paperwork. The filing attorney was Benjamin Carlisle. Colton sat with that for exactly 3 seconds. Long enough to feel it. Not long enough to let it become something that paralyzed him. Because there were 2 explanations, and he needed to determine which one was true before he did anything else. Either Carlisle had knowingly participated in the transfer of Aldrich's land as part of Voss's scheme, or someone had used Carlisle's name on a document the same way they had used Colton's name on the partnership amendment. He stood up from the desk. "Get me a horse," he said to the man by the door. "Now." "You're going to town," the man said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'm going to the telegraph office," Colton said. "And then I'm going to Carlisle's office because he rode there directly from here, and I need to speak with him before he files anything else." He was already moving toward the hall. "Keep Price in that room. Keep Decker and the other 2 in the barn under guard. Nobody leaves this property without my direct authorization." I was in the hall when Lillian came out of the kitchen doorway again, and this time he stopped, because the look on her face was different from every other look she had given him today. It was not fear, and it was not careful composure. It was something more direct than either of those. "Carlisle," she said. He looked at her. "Last week," she said. "Tuesday. Mr. Carlisle came to the ranch. You were out at the north pasture. He went to the study and waited for you, and I brought him coffee. We spoke for a few minutes." She paused. "He asked me how long I had worked here. He asked whether I was content with my position. And then he asked very casually, the way you ask something you don't want to seem important, whether I had noticed Mr. Price spending time in the study." "What did you tell him?" Colton said. "I told him I had seen the lamp in the study window at night." She met his eyes. He didn't say anything else about it. He just thanked me for the coffee and waited for you to come in." She paused again. "But Colton, the way he asked. It wasn't the way an innocent man asks about something he's worried about. It was the way a man asks when he already knows the answer, and he's checking to see how much someone else knows." The hall was very quiet. Colton thought about Carlisle riding out of this gate an hour ago on Burl's fast horse leather case under his arm, headed to the telegraph office to file an injunction that would stop Voss's asset transfer. Or that was what Carlisle had said he was going to do. "He told me he needed to reach Denver before close of business," Colton said slowly. "File the injunction. Contest the forgery." "Yes," Lillian said. "And if he's working with Voss, what does that mean?" It meant the injunction would not be filed. It meant the wire to Denver would not warn the marshal. It meant every legal action Colton thought was moving in his favor right now was moving in the opposite direction, and the man he had sent to execute it was the man it needed to be executed against. It meant Carlisle had been in that hall an hour ago, telling Colton exactly what Colton needed to hear. It meant Colton had let him walk out the door and put him on the fastest horse on the property. He turned toward the front of the house. "Wyatt is still out," he said more to himself than to Lillian. "Burl came back 20 minutes ago," she said. "He's in the yard." He was moving before she finished the sentence. Burl Dawson was a compact, weathered man of 50 who had been working cattle since before Colton was born, and who communicated primarily in single syllables and facial expressions, both of which were precise and economical and never wasted. He was standing near the water trough when Colton came through the front door, and he read Colton's face and straightened immediately. "Carlisle," Colton said. "How long ago did he leave?" "Hour, give or take," Burl said. "On your horse?" "Yes." "What's the fastest thing left in the stable?" Burl thought for half a second. "The roan mare. She's fresh." "Saddle her," Colton said. Right now. Burl went without another word. Colton stood in the yard and ran the math. An hour on a fast horse toward town was 4 miles or close to it. If Carlisle had gone directly to the telegraph office, the wire to Denver might already be sent, but what was in it, and to whom Colton could not know. If Carlisle had gone to his own office first to retrieve something or to meet someone, there was still time. There was a window. There was always a window. The question was whether you moved fast enough to get through it before it closed. Wyatt rode through the ranch gate 2 minutes later alone, moving at a pace that said he had news, and it was not good news. He pulled up in front of Colton and was off the horse before it fully stopped. The Alderville wire, Wyatt said. I got there too late. The message had already gone. Colton looked at him. When? He said. They sent it at 9 this morning, before we were even off the mountain. Wyatt's jaw was tight. The girl didn't wait for the freight wagon to reach Alderville. She got off at a relay station outside of Harmon, found a private rider, and paid him to take a message to the Alderville office directly. Whoever set this up built in a backup that didn't depend on the wagon schedule. Voss had not built one contingency. He had built two. The girl was not an afterthought. She was the primary early warning, moving independently of everything else designed to activate the moment. The morning passed without the expected confirmation, which meant Voss already knew something had gone wrong. Which meant right now in Denver, Gideon Voss was doing exactly what Colton had feared he would do. He's running, Colton said. Probably already running, Wyatt said. Question is where. Colton thought about what he knew about Gideon Voss. Not the business partner, not the man across the table, the man underneath that, the one who had been planning this for 6 months. The one who had built redundancies and fallbacks and a forged signature and a legal amendment and an inside man and a hired killer with a list of 8 names. That man did not run blind. That man had a destination. He has money somewhere that isn't connected to the company accounts, Colton said. He's had 6 months to move it. Somewhere he can access it without going through a bank that knows his name in connection with mine. California, Wyatt said. Or south. Mexico border's easier to cross than most people think if you have enough cash. He's not going to Mexico, Colton said. He's too proud for Mexico. He thinks he can go somewhere far enough that this doesn't reach him, buy himself a new situation, start over with money he's already moved. He paused. He'd go east, somewhere with enough commerce and enough anonymity that a man with cash and a different name becomes invisible fast. St. Louis, Wyatt said. Or Chicago, Colton said. He mentioned Chicago once. Said it was the only city that moved fast enough to suit him. Burl came out of the stable with the roan mare saddled and ready, and Colton took the reins. Wyatt, he said, one boot in the stirrup. Send a rider to the sheriff in town right now. Full account written signed with my name. The mountain decker, the creek bed man, the driver, Harlan Price, all of it. The sheriff needs to file the territorial arrest documentation before close of business today, and I need it moving while I'm dealing with Carlisle. And if Carlisle's already at the telegraph office, then I'm too late on the wire, Colton said, but I'm not too late on him. He rode. The road to town was 4 miles, and he covered it in a way that would have horrified a more cautious man and suited him exactly. The roan was everything Burl had said she was: fast and smooth-gaited and responsive, the kind of horse that gave you back everything you asked for, and then some. He reached the telegraph office first. The operator was a narrow, nervous man named Fitch, who had been in that office for 9 years and who looked up when Colton came through the door with the expression of a man who could tell from the quality of an entrance that what was coming next was going to be complicated. Carlisle, Colton said. Benjamin Carlisle. Did he come in today? Fitch's expression confirmed it before he spoke. About 40 minutes ago, he said. What did he send? Sir, I'm not in a position to... Fitch. Colton put his hands flat on the counter and looked at the man directly. In the last 24 hours there has been an attempt on my life on the Dalton Pass Road. 2 men are currently in custody at my ranch for that attempt, and I have reason to believe that the wire sent from this office 40 minutes ago was part of a coordinated fraud scheme that has destroyed at least one other man's property and may have cost other men their lives. I need to know what was in that wire. Right now. Before the man who sent it finishes whatever he's doing next, and I lose the thread." Fitch looked at him for a moment. Then he pulled out the carbon copy and laid it on the counter without another word. Colton read it. It was addressed to the Denver Territorial Court Clerk's office. It was not an injunction filing. It was a withdrawal. A withdrawal of a previously submitted contest to the Meridian Valley Partners land acquisition filed under Carlyle's letterhead, citing resolution of the dispute by mutual agreement of all parties. Colton read it twice. Then he set it down on the counter very carefully. Carlyle had not come here to fight for Colton. He had come here to close the last open legal challenge that might have unraveled the Aldrich land transfer, the challenge that Carlyle himself had apparently filed at some earlier point, perhaps genuinely, perhaps as a controlled opposition designed to give Voss a mechanism to demonstrate resolution. Either way, it was gone now. "Is he still in town?" Colton said. "Went toward his office," Fitch said. "I saw him cross the street." Colton sent one wire of his own before he left to the Denver Marshal's office, direct using the Marshal's personal identification code that Colton had been given years ago during a cattle theft investigation that the Marshal had personally handled. It was the kind of code you kept for moments when normal channels were compromised. He had never used it before. He used it now. He named Gideon Voss. He named Meridian Valley Partners. He named the forgery, the murder conspiracy, the list with 8 names. He named Carlyle. He named the Aldrich property. He asked the Marshal to hold Voss on site pending territorial charges and to freeze all account transfers under the company name until a judge could review the documentation. He paid Fitch double the standard rate. Then he crossed the street to Carlyle's office. The door was unlocked. He went in without knocking. Benjamin Carlyle was standing behind his desk with his leather case open in front of him and papers spread out that he was in the process of organizing. And when Colton walked through the door, the movement of his hands stopped completely. He did not look surprised. That was the thing that Colton would remember later, that Carlyle did not look surprised to see him alive, which meant Carlyle had known by then that the plan had failed, which meant the wire that had gone from Alderville this morning had reached him too. Not just Voss. They had both been waiting to see who walked through that door. "Ben," Colton said. He closed the door behind him. Carlyle straightened slowly. He was 61 years old, silver-haired with the careful, measured bearing of a man who had spent 4 decades being the steadiest person in difficult rooms. He had represented Colton through 3 major land disputes and 2 contract negotiations, and had always been, in Colton's experience, exactly what he presented himself to be. Colton was beginning to understand that the capacity to be consistently convincing was not the same as being honest. "How long?" Colton said. Carlyle was quiet for a moment. 4 years, he said. Colton absorbed that. 4 years. Before the partnership amendment. Before Harlan Price. Before Decker's list. 4 years of sitting across from Colton in this office and in the ranch study and in meeting rooms and courtrooms and being at every moment something other than what he said he was. "What did he give you?" Colton said. "The Ridgway account," Carlyle said. He said it without inflection, as if he was stating a legal fact. "You remember the Ridgway case, 7 years ago. I handled the settlement." "I remember. There were funds from that settlement that I redirected," Carlyle said. "Incorrectly. Gideon Voss discovered it 4 years ago. He came to me with documentation." A pause. "He told me I could go to prison for what I'd done with those funds, or I could assist him with certain matters going forward, and the documentation would remain private." "He blackmailed you," Colton said. "Yes." Carlyle said the word with a particular flatness that suggested he had spent 4 years trying to find a better word for it, and had never succeeded. "And the Aldrich land," Colton said. "You filed the paperwork." "I filed the transfer," Carlyle said. "I didn't know what had happened to Aldrich at the time. Voss told me it was a negotiated sale. I believed him." A pause that was slightly too long. "For a while." "But not after a while." "No," Carlyle said quietly. "Not after a while." "And you said nothing." "I had already filed the documents. My name was already on them. By the time I understood what had actually happened to Aldrich, there was no clean way out that didn't take me down with it." He looked at Colton with something that was not quite an appeal, but was adjacent to one. I am not telling you this as an excuse. I'm telling you this because you asked, and because I am tired, Colton. I have been carrying this for 4 years, and I am very, very tired. The room held silence for a moment. Colton thought about James Aldrich, about a man who had built something over 15 years and then either sold it at distress prices or had it taken from him by force and been made to disappear, and whose land was now sitting in the portfolio of a shell company controlled by Gideon Voss, and whose fate was still unknown. He thought about the 7 other names on that list. He thought about all the weight that Carlyle had described carrying for 4 years, and he thought about what it said that Carlyle had kept carrying it rather than putting it down. James Aldrich, Colton said. Where is he? Carlyle closed his eyes briefly. There is a man, he said, in a sanitarium outside Colorado Springs. He has been there for 14 months under a different name. Voss had him declared mentally incompetent through a fraudulent medical proceeding. The incompetency ruling is what enabled the land transfer without Aldrich's direct signature. He opened his eyes. He is alive. He is not well, but he is alive. And the incompetency ruling can be contested if someone with standing files the right documentation. Colton stared at him. You knew this, he said. You have known this. Yes. For how long? 8 months. The words fell between them like something physical. 8 months. Carlyle had known where James Aldrich was for 8 months and had said nothing and filed no challenge and done nothing except carry it and be tired. Colton breathed in through his nose, breathed out. You're going to write all of it down, he said. Everything. The Ridgeway funds, the Aldrich transfer, the amendment filing, Voss's instructions, the names of anyone else involved that you know of. You're going to write it in your own hand and sign it, and I am going to take it to the territorial judge this afternoon, along with the other documentation. He paused. And you're going to tell me the name that James Aldrich is being held under in Colorado Springs so I can have someone there by tomorrow morning. Carlyle looked at him for a long moment. And in exchange, he said. In exchange, Colton said, I will tell the judge that you cooperated fully and that the cooperation was immediate and complete. What the judge does with that information is not something I control, but it will be on the record. He met Carlyle's eyes. That's the only offer I have. Carlyle sat down slowly in his chair. He pulled a clean sheet of paper toward him and picked up his pen. He began to write. Colton sat in the chair across the desk, the same relative position he realized as when he had sat across from Harlan Price an hour ago, and watched the man write and thought about the shape of what Voss had built, the layers of it, the way each piece had been placed to support the others so that if any one piece was removed, the others could still hold. Carlyle for the legal cover, Price for the internal access, Decker for the physical act, the driver for the transportation, the kitchen girl for the early warning, and underneath all of it, running back 4 years, the leverage on Carlyle that had given Voss access to a legitimate legal professional whose name on a document carried the weight of actual standing. It was sophisticated. It was patient. It was the work of a man who understood that the best way to take something from someone was not to attack them directly, but to quietly dismantle the ground they were standing on, until the moment came when one final push sent them over an edge they hadn't seen coming. Colton would not give Gideon Voss the satisfaction of thinking he had built something that couldn't be taken apart. He watched Carlyle write. After 20 minutes, the written statement was complete, 4 pages detailed, signed and dated. Carlyle added a 5th page with James Aldrich's assumed name and the address of the Colorado Springs facility, and the name of the fraudulent physician who had signed the incompetency ruling. Colton took all 5 pages. He stood. The man who's going to Colorado Springs, Carlyle said, and his voice was different now, quieter, the voice of a man who has set something down that was very heavy. Tell him to ask for a man named Warren, Robert Warren. That's what they have him registered as. He paused. And tell whoever goes that Aldrich does not trust easily anymore. He'll need to hear a name that Aldrich will recognize from before. Tell him to say the name Connie. Who is Connie? Colton said. His wife, Carlyle said. She died 2 years before all of this started. He talked about her to me once years ago when we were working a property filing together. He said she was the only person who had ever known him completely. Carlyle looked at his own hands on the desk. Tell whoever goes to say that Connie would want him to come home. He'll understand. Colton nodded once. He walked out of Carlyle's office into the afternoon and stood on the street and let the air move around him for a moment. He had 4 pieces of paper in one pocket and a dead man's list in the other, and a ranch full of bound conspirators waiting for the sheriff and a legitimate attorney in his hand, because whatever Carlyle had done, the written confession made him useful now in a way that counteracted the damage. And somewhere in Denver, a man named Gideon Voss was either running or waiting, and either way was going to be found. The marshal's wire would reach Denver by now. Whether Voss was already gone was something Colton would know within hours. He mounted the roan and started back toward the ranch and made himself think about what still needed doing, rather than about everything that had already been lost and would need to be rebuilt. The Aldrich land, the 7 other names on the list, the fraudulent amendment, the breeding records Voss had altered, the investors who had been dealing with a company whose senior partner they believed was managing it honestly and who deserved to know what had been done in their names. It was a long list. He was still working through it when he came back through the ranch gate and saw Lillian standing on the porch of the main house. She was not wringing her hands this time. She was standing straight, arms at her sides, watching him come in with an expression that was steady and calm and enormously relieved, and doing its best not to show how enormous that relief was. He dismounted. He walked up to the porch. He looked at her and said, "Carlyle was involved. 4 years. He's cooperating now. He's given me everything." She took that in. "And Voss. The marshal's office has his name. I don't know yet if they have him." He paused. "But they will." She nodded. She believed him. It was in her face, not blind faith, not the belief of someone who had been persuaded, but the belief of someone who had watched how a person operated and had made a judgment based on evidence. "Burl's son is riding to Colorado Springs in the morning," he said. "There's a man there who needs to come home." She didn't ask who. She could see from his face that it was a longer answer than the porch could hold right now. "Are you hurt?" she said. "No." "You were gone for 4 hours, and there was a gunshot from somewhere on the mountain, and no one would tell me anything." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I need to start the supper. There are hungry men in the barn who are under arrest, and hungry men in the yard who made the arrests, and all of them need to eat regardless." "That's true," he said. She turned toward the door. "Lillian," he said. She stopped. "When you said this morning that you noticed things," he said, "that you had been noticing things for weeks, I want you to know that I understand now what it cost you to do that, to watch and carry and wait, and then to stand in front of that coach." He paused. "I don't think I said that clearly enough before." She was quiet for a moment with her hand on the doorframe. "You came back," she said. That said it clearly enough. She went inside. Colton stood on the porch for a moment longer, looking out across the yard where his men were moving with purpose, and the day was burning down toward evening, and the ranch that someone had spent 6 months trying to take from him was still standing under his feet. Then the sheriff's deputy rode through the gate with 2 more men behind him, and Colton went down the steps to meet them, because there was still a great deal of today left, and none of it was going to manage itself. But for the first time since he had climbed into that coach at dawn, he knew with certainty how this was going to end. And it was not going to end the way Gideon Voss had planned. The wire from Denver came at 8:30 that evening. Colton was in the study with the sheriff's deputy and 2 stacks of documents and a cold cup of coffee. He had forgotten to drink when the ranch hand knocked twice and came in without waiting to be invited, which told him everything about the urgency before the man opened his mouth. "Wire from the marshal's office," the hand said and held it out. Colton took it, read it once, read it again. Gideon Voss had been located at the Denver rail station at 6:47 that evening with a leather trunk and 2 traveling cases and a ticket purchased under the name Gerald Hartwell on the 7 o'clock eastbound to Chicago. The marshal's men had taken him off the platform 40 seconds before the train pulled out. He had not gone quietly. He had told them they had no authority, that he was a legitimate businessman, that his attorney would have them all removed from their positions before the week was out. His attorney, as it happened, was Benjamin Carlisle, who was currently cooperating with the territorial investigation from a chair in his own office under the supervision of a deputy marshal. Colton set the wire down on the desk. The sheriff's deputy looked at him. "They have him." "They have him," Colton said. The deputy leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "That's the piece I wasn't sure of, he said. "Man like that with enough money moved ahead of time can make himself very hard to find if he gets a full day's head start." "He didn't get a full day," Colton said. "He got about 9 hours. Because of the wire you sent this morning." "Because of the wire I sent this morning," Colton said. "And because the marshal's code I used bypasses the standard routing and goes directly to his desk. Without that, it sits in a queue and gets processed by whoever happens to pick it up, and Voss is on that train to Chicago, and we're trying to extradite him from Illinois." He paused. "Margins." "Yes, sir," the deputy said. "Margins." Colton picked up his coffee, found it cold, set it back down. He thought about Gideon Voss standing on a train platform in Denver with a ticket under a false name and a trunk full of whatever he had managed to move in the hours since the warning wire came from Alderville. He thought about the expression on Voss's face when the marshal's men stepped in front of him, the exact moment when a man who had spent 6 months building an elaborate plan discovered that the plan had a flaw he hadn't accounted for. The flaw had been standing in a courtyard at dawn, with her arms raised and her boots in the dirt. "I need to tell someone," Colton said, and stood up from the desk. The deputy looked mildly surprised, but said nothing, which was one of the things Colton had always respected about competent lawmen. They understood when information was being shared with them, and when it was simply being stated aloud to the room. Lillian was in the kitchen. Still. She had fed the men in the yard and the men in the barn, and sent plates to the 2 deputies who were watching the door, and had apparently made coffee for half the county while she was at it. And she was standing at the work table when Colton came through the door for the 3rd time that day, and she looked at his face and knew before he said a single word. "They got him," she said. "Train platform in Denver," Colton said. 40 seconds before the 7 o'clock to Chicago. She put both hands flat on the table and bent her head forward and breathed out slowly, the long shuddering breath of a person who has been holding their body rigid for approximately 16 hours and has just been given permission to let it go. Her shoulders came down from where they had been sitting up near her ears. The line of her jaw unclenched. 40 seconds, she said. 40 seconds, he said. She lifted her head. Her eyes were wet, but her expression was not grief. It was something fiercer than grief, and more complicated. The expression of a person who has been afraid for a very long time, and has just watched the source of that fear get removed from the equation, and is still processing the fact that it is real, and not something they imagined. "Is it over?" she said. "Not entirely," he said. "There will be proceedings. The territorial court, the fraud charges, the forgery, the conspiracy counts. The Aldrich matter needs to be fully resolved. James Aldrich is still in Colorado Springs, and getting him out of that facility properly will take legal work and time. The other names on that list need to be investigated. The breeding records Voss altered need to be corrected, and the investors need to be properly informed." He paused. "There is a great deal still to do. But Voss is in custody," she said. "Voss is in custody," he said. "Decker and the creek bedman and the driver are in custody. Harlan Price is cooperating. Carlisle is cooperating. The forged amendment has been flagged for the territorial court, and the injunction is now being filed correctly through the marshal's office." He looked at her. "The foundation is solid. The rest is work, and I know how to work." She nodded slowly. They stood in the kitchen, in the particular quiet of a day that has been enormous and is finally tentatively beginning to exhale, and the only sounds were the lamp on the wall and the faint voice of one of the deputies out in the yard, and somewhere further out, one of the horses settling for the night. "Your children," Colton said. "Are they still in town?" "At the school teacher's," she said. "I should send word that it's safe to bring them back." "I'll have a rider go tonight," he said. "They can be home by morning." She looked at him. "Thank you." "Lillian." He said her name the way he had been saying it all day directly, without the distancing formality of miss or ma'am, and she met his eyes. I meant what I said on the porch earlier, about what it cost you, but I want to say something else. He paused, choosing the words with the care of a man who did not use many of them carelessly. The position I mentioned this morning, managing the ranch supply accounts and inventory. I want you to consider it seriously, and I want you to know it's not offered out of gratitude. She was quiet. It's offered, he said, because in one day I watched you demonstrate more operational intelligence and more genuine courage than most people I have worked with over 20 years. You moved your children before the danger was confirmed. You held the evidence safely for 12 hours without telling the wrong person. You identified Price independently, and Carlisle's suspicious behavior, and the kitchen girl's communication with Price. 3 things I had missed entirely. You did all of that while maintaining the routine of your position so that no one knew anything had changed. He paused again. That is not luck, and it is not accident. That is ability. I would be a fool not to put it to use. She looked at him for a long moment. The careful expression was still there, the one that didn't count on things before they were certain. But underneath it, something was shifting. I would need a fair wage, she said. Yes, he said. And I would need to be spoken to directly, not through Wyatt, not through whoever else is managing the morning meeting. If something in the accounts is wrong, or something in the inventory doesn't add up, I need to be able to come to you without going through 3 people first. Agreed, he said. And my children stay in the rooms they're in now. I'm not moving them to the workers' quarters just because my title changed. They stay where they are, he said. She studied him. You're agreeing to everything very quickly. Because everything you're asking for is reasonable, he said. And because I've spent the last 12 hours watching you operate, and I would rather have you on my side of any negotiation than the other side. Something moved across her face that was very close to a smile, but hadn't quite committed to being one yet. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking, he said. He went back to the study. He did not sleep that night. There was too much to document, too many statements to review, too many threads to secure before morning. The sheriff's deputy stayed until midnight and left with a bound stack of signed documentation that represented the most complete account of Voss's scheme that Colton could put together in a single evening. 2 deputies remained on the property overnight with the prisoners. Wyatt checked the guard rotation at midnight and at 3 in the morning, and reported both times that everything was holding. At 4:30 in the morning, when the sky was the particular dark that comes just before it starts to change. Colton put down his pen and sat back in the desk chair and looked at the ceiling. He thought about the list. He had been thinking about the list all night, working around it, the way you work around something that you know you need to face directly, and keep finding reasons to approach from the side instead. 8 names. His was 4th. The 3 above his were James Aldrich, whose situation Carlisle had described, and who was alive in Colorado Springs under a false name. A man named Pearson, about whom Colton had as yet found nothing, whose name sat at the top of the list, with a number beside it, and no other notation. And a man named Cole Garrett, second from the top, who Colton knew by reputation as a rancher from 2 territories over, who had sold out and retired 18 months ago, or who everyone had been told had sold out and retired. I was going to have to find out what had actually happened to Pearson and Garrett. He was going to have to find out what had happened to all of them. The 4 names below his on the list were men who were still out there, still living their lives, still unaware that a professional killer had their name on a piece of paper in a vest pocket. Those men needed to be warned. Today, if possible. Tomorrow, at the absolute latest. He picked up the pen again and started writing letters. I was still writing when he heard the kitchen come to life at 5:30, the sound of the stove being stoked, water being moved, the specific rhythmic activity of someone beginning the business of feeding people. He did not need to hear her voice to know it was Lillian. He had spent 3 years with those sounds as background, and he knew them the way you know the sounds of a place that is yours. At 6 o'clock, she knocked on the study door and came in with coffee that was actually hot and a plate of food he had not asked for, and set both on the corner of the desk without moving any of his papers. She looked at the letters he had been writing. "The other names on the list," she said. "Yes." "How many?" "4 still need warning. 2 I need to investigate. 1 I know the situation on." He picked up the coffee. 7, not counting mine. She sat down in the chair across the desk, not waiting for an invitation. She had stopped waiting for invitations somewhere during the previous day, and he had not noticed the moment it happened, but he was glad of it. "Tell me what you need," she said. He looked at her. "The letters," she said. "If you tell me what needs to be in them, I can write a clean hand, and you can sign them, and we get 4 done faster than one person working alone." He considered this for approximately 1 second. Then he turned the paper toward her, and she picked up the second pen from the desk holder, and they worked. They worked for 2 hours. By the time the ranch was fully awake, and Wyatt was moving through his morning duties, and the smell of breakfast had made its way from the kitchen, there were 4 warning letters, sealed and ready for riders, and 2 investigative requests drafted for contacts in neighboring territories, and a summary document prepared for the Territorial Attorney's Office that laid out the full scope of what Colton now believed Voss had done across the region over a period of at least 2 years. Lillian wrote with a clear, precise hand that moved quickly and without hesitation. She asked questions when something was unclear and did not ask them when it wasn't, which was the correct proportion. When Colton referenced a legal term she didn't know, she asked him to define it without any embarrassment, and when he defined it, she used it correctly in the next sentence. At 7:30. Wyatt put his head in the study door, looked at both of them, working at the desk, and withdrew without comment, in the manner of a man who has observed something he considers none of his business and intends to keep it that way. At 8 o'clock, the riders went out with the letters. At 9 o'clock, Burl Dawson's son, a young man of 23 named Cal, who had his father's quiet steadiness and considerably more speed, rode south toward Colorado Springs with the name Robert Warren and the address of the sanitarium and the instruction to say the word Connie and bring James Aldrich home. At 10 o'clock, a second wire came from the Denver Marshal's office. Colton read it standing in the hall and then read it again because the first reading didn't seem possible. I went back to the study, where Lillian was organizing the documentation they had produced through the night and morning, and he held the wire out to her without saying anything first, which was not something he typically did, but which felt right in this specific moment. She read it. Her face went very still. "Pearson," she said quietly. "The first name on the list." "Marcus Pearson," Colton said. "Cattle operation in Wyoming. Disappeared 14 months ago. His family was told he had gone to San Francisco for medical treatment." He paused. The marshal's office found correspondence in Voss's trunk, the one he was carrying at the train station, that references a payment to Decker dated 14 months ago. She looked up at him. "He was the first," she said. "Apparently," Colton said. The room was quiet for a moment. Lillian set the wire down on the desk with careful hands. When she looked back at Colton, her expression had the quality of someone who has just had the full scale of something made clear to them. Not surprised, because she had understood from the beginning that this went deep, but affected in the way you are affected when a thing you understood abstractly becomes concrete. "I was doing this for at least 14 months, she said. "Before Price, before the amendment, before any of the pieces I saw." "Before any of it," Colton said. Voss was patient. He built the legal structure first. The amendment, the shell company, the fraudulent incompetency ruling for Aldrich. He needed those in place before he moved. Pearson may have been a test, the first one, working out whether the method was viable before committing to the full plan. "A test," she said, and the word came out with a weight that made clear she was thinking about what it meant to be someone's test case. A man, a family, a life. "Yes," Colton said. "Then we have to find out what happened to him," she said. Not a question, a statement of intent. "Yes," Colton said again. "We do." She picked up her pen. The days that followed moved differently than the day that had started it all. Not with that specific quality of compressed urgency of hours that held more than hours should be able to hold, but with the different and in some ways more demanding pace of sustained effort towards something that kept revealing new dimensions the closer you got to it. The territorial proceedings began within the week. Voss was held in Denver, pending extradition to the territorial court, which was not a simple matter, because Voss's legal team assembled quickly from a roster of Denver attorneys who had not yet heard the full scope of the charges, filed 3 separate motions attempting to delay the transfer. All 3 were denied. The forged amendment was entered into evidence on the 4th day of proceedings, and the handwriting expert Carlisle had referenced a man named Foster, who worked out of St. Louis and had testified in federal forgery cases, confirmed within 48 hours of examining it that the signature was not authentic. Gideon Voss's position became considerably less comfortable after that. Decker made a deal on the 8th day. He gave the prosecution the full accounting of every contract he had taken from Voss. 5 total, not 4. There was a 5th name. Colton had not known about a land agent in Colorado named Briggs, who had apparently been about to expose the Meridian Valley scheme from the inside before Decker resolved the situation 9 months ago. Briggs's body was recovered from a creek bed in the mountains east of Pueblo on the 14th day. His family had been told he had left the territory. Cole Garrett, second on the list, was found alive. He had not sold out and retired. He had been coerced in a process that mirrored what had been done to Aldrich. Fraudulent documentation pressure applied through channels that exploited Carlisle's legal standing, a forced transfer of assets at a fraction of their value. He was living in a boarding house in Omaha, with considerably less than he had owned 2 years prior, and considerably more anger than he knew what to do with. When the letter from Colton reached him, he was on the next train back to the territory to appear as a witness, and he arrived with an expression that suggested he had been waiting for this specific opportunity since the day he left. James Aldrich came home on the 19th day. Cal Dawson had found him on the 3rd day after riding to Colorado Springs, which meant that the first 16 days of his return journey were spent in the careful process of legal extraction, contesting the incompetency ruling, establishing Aldrich's identity, correctly navigating the requirements of the sanitarium's administration, who were not themselves corrupt, but who were thorough in their own paperwork in the way that institutions protect themselves from liability. Cal had handled all of it with the same quiet efficiency his father brought to everything. And when he finally rode through the ranch gate with James Aldrich in the saddle beside him, the man who had spent 14 months in a facility under a name that was not his own was thin and gray-faced and quiet, in the way of someone who has been through something that words keep failing to adequately describe. Colton met him in the yard. Aldrich looked at him for a moment without speaking. He was a man in his early 50s who had clearly been something solid and capable before what had happened to him, and the evidence of that original substance was still there under the damage. The way the structure of a house is still there under fire damage, if the fire hasn't gone all the way through. Cal told me you found me because of a list, Aldrich said. A list Voss's hired man was carrying, Colton said. Your name was on it. Above yours, Aldrich said. Yes. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. I want to testify, he said. Whatever the proceedings need. I want to stand up in front of whatever judge is handling this and say exactly what happened to me from the day Voss's man first came to my property. Everything. All of it. I was going to ask you exactly that, Colton said. Aldrich put out his hand. Colton shook it. They went inside. Lillian had known Aldrich was coming. She had the kitchen operating accordingly, and when the 2 men came through the front door, she appeared in the hall with the practical, unsentimental competence of a person who understood that what a man who had been through what Aldrich had been through needed first was not sympathy or ceremony, but food and quiet, and the tangible evidence that ordinary life was still available to him. She showed him to the sitting room. She brought food. She said without excessive warmth and without coldness, "You're welcome to stay as long as you need to." Then she left him to it. Aldrich looked at Colton after she had gone. "Who is she?" he said. "She works here," Colton said. And then, because that was plainly inadequate, he said, "She's the reason any of us are sitting in this room right now." Aldrich looked toward the hall where she had disappeared. "Then I'd like to thank her properly when the time is right," he said. "She'll tell you it's unnecessary," Colton said. "Thank her anyway." The territorial proceedings concluded 6 weeks after Voss's arrest. It was not a fast conclusion. It was fast for its scope and complexity, which was a different thing. The judge was a precise, unimpressed man named Hartwell, who had presided over 3 major fraud cases in the territory, and who read through the documentation that Carlyle and Price and Decker and Garrett and Aldrich had collectively produced, and arrived at his findings with a thoroughness that suggested he had not missed a single page. Gideon Voss was convicted on 7 counts: conspiracy to commit murder, fraud in the first degree, forgery of legal documents, criminal coercion, fraudulent property transfer, conspiracy in the unlawful detention of James Aldrich, and 1 count, the last one, read into the record of involvement in the death of Marcus Pearson and the death of the land agent Briggs. The sentence was delivered on a cold morning in October, with the courtroom full and the wind coming hard off the mountains outside. Colton sat in the front row and listened to every word. He did not feel what he had expected to feel. He had thought there would be something decisive and complete in the moment, some internal closing of a door that had been open since the morning Lillian stepped in front of that coach. Instead, what he felt was quieter than that. Something more like setting a stone down that had been in his hand for a long time. The weight was gone, but his hand remembered the shape of it. I walked out of the courthouse into the October air, and Wyatt was waiting on the steps with his hat in his hands and the particular expression he wore when he had something to say and was deciding how to say it. "Good outcome," Wyatt said. "Yes," Colton said. "The Aldrich land ruling came through this morning while you were inside," Wyatt said. "Meridian Valley Partners has been dissolved by court order. The 460 acres revert to Aldrich's legal ownership effective immediately." Colton nodded. "Garrett's property situation is more complicated," Wyatt said. "The land was already sold through the shell company to a third party who claims bona fide purchaser status. Carlyle's replacement attorney thinks it'll take another 3 months of proceedings to sort." "Garrett knows," Colton said. "He knew when he came back that it wasn't going to be simple. He's staying for it." Wyatt nodded. "Ann Briggs's family, the widow in Pueblo. She has been notified. I wrote to her myself," Colton said. They stood on the courthouse steps for a moment in the October wind. "You know," Wyatt said, and his voice had the specific quality it got when he was about to say something he had been turning over for a while. "I've worked for a lot of men in this territory. I've seen a lot of situations go wrong. I've seen men handle the going wrong part well, and I've seen them handle it poorly, and I've seen outcomes that went every direction in between." He paused. "What you did from that morning to now, the way you ran it, the decisions you made, the things you held together under the kind of pressure that breaks most people, that was one of the best things I've watched a man do in 30 years of watching." Colton looked at him. "I mean it," Wyatt said simply. "Noted," Colton said, "and appreciated." They rode back to the ranch together in the afternoon quiet, with the aspens along the road showing their October color yellow and gold, and the particular red that only comes for about a week at that elevation, and Colton rode through all of it without seeing it very clearly, because he was thinking about something he needed to say, and turning over how to say it the way he turned over most things carefully and without rushing. Lillian was in the supply office when he got back. The supply office was a room off the back of the main house that had previously been used primarily to store things that didn't have anywhere else to go, and which in the 3 weeks since she had taken the position, she had transformed into something that functioned as an actual working office, organized, efficient, annotated in her clear hand, the accounts reconciled, and the inventory current in a way they had not been since Colton had hired Harlan Price to supposedly do the same thing. She looked up when he came in. She read his face the way she read everything. "It's done," she said. "7 counts," he said. "The maximum the territorial code allows for most of them." She set down her pen. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the October light was doing what October light does in Montana, going gold and long-angled and making everything it touched look more substantial than it does the rest of the year. "The Pearson family," she said. "I'm going to Wyoming next month," he said, "to speak with them directly. A letter isn't enough for what happened to Marcus Pearson." She nodded. She had expected nothing less, and her expression said so. He sat down in the chair across from her desk. Her desk. Now that was how he thought of it. It had become hers in the 3 weeks she had occupied it, with the kind of quiet authority that doesn't announce itself, but is simply present. And he looked at her for a moment. "I want to ask you something," he said. "All right," she said. When you stepped in front of that coach, he said. In that moment. Not what you thought about it beforehand, or what you understood logically about why it mattered. In that specific moment, when you put your feet in the road and spread your arms, what were you feeling? She considered the question seriously, which was what she did with questions she was asked seriously. Terrified, she said. Completely terrified. My legs were shaking so hard I thought they were going to stop holding me up. She paused. And also, and I know this sounds strange, I felt very clear. Like all the noise that had been in my head for months. All the things I wasn't sure about, and the things I was second-guessing, and the fear of what would happen to my children if I got it wrong. All of that went quiet. And there was just the one thing. The thing that needed doing. And the clarity of it made the terror feel like something I could stand inside of without it stopping me. He looked at her. That doesn't sound strange, he said. That's exactly what courage is. She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her pen again and turned back to the accounts, which was her way of handling things that came too close to the center of her, and he understood it and respected it and stood up to go. Colton, she said. He stopped at the door. I've been thinking about what you said, she said. When you said everyone saw what I looked like and you were lucky enough to see who I was. He waited. I want you to know, she said, looking not at him, but at the account book open in front of her, that it matters. What you said, what you've done since, the way you've treated me and spoken about me to other people, and made sure the people on this property understand that I have standing here. She paused. I spent a long time being invisible. I got used to it. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I didn't need to be seen. She set the pen down. She looked up at him. But I did need it, and I do, and I am grateful to you for it. He stood in the doorway with the October light coming in over his shoulder and looked at this woman who had walked through one of the hardest years of her life and then turned around and stepped into the path of a stagecoach to save a man who had barely known her name. And he thought about all the things that had had to be true simultaneously for this morning to have gone the way it went. All the fear she had carried and the precision she had maintained and the judgment she had exercised alone, without anyone to confirm whether she was right in the dark, and the quiet of a kitchen with a stuck window and a piece of paper on the ground. Lillian, he said. She looked at him. I was not lucky, he said. Lucky implies chance. There was nothing accidental about what you did. You chose it. Every step of it was a choice you made. He held her gaze. I am grateful. That's different from lucky. She looked at him for a long moment, and then, for the first time since the morning, she had stopped a stagecoach with her own body and changed the course of both their lives. Lillian Brooks smiled. Not the careful, contained expression she wore when she was managing herself. Not the practical acknowledgement of a task completed. A real smile, full and unguarded, the kind that a woman gives when she has been seen so completely and so accurately that there is nothing left to protect. Get back to work, Mr. Hawthorne, she said. He smiled too. Yes, ma'am, he said. He went back to work. And in the months that followed, as the territorial proceedings closed their final chapters, and James Aldrich rebuilt what had been taken from him, and Cole Garrett fought his 3 more months of proceedings and won them, and as the warning letters Colton had sent reached 4 men who changed their locks and hired attorneys and lived differently because of what they now knew, and as the Hawthorne Ranch moved through its autumn and into its winter and out the other side, into a spring that felt like something earned rather than simply arrived at through all of it. The ranch ran the way things run when the right people are in the right places doing the right work. Wyatt managed the land with the same quiet precision he had always brought to it. Burl managed the horses. Cal managed the south pasture and was showing signs of becoming something exceptional. And Lillian Brooks managed the accounts and the inventory and the supply chain, and in the way that competent people in important positions inevitably do, considerably more than that, the things that didn't have official titles, the operational intelligence of a property run by someone who noticed everything and forgot nothing, and understood that the difference between a ranch that thrives and a ranch that merely survives is almost never the land or the cattle or the money. It is always the people. It is always the person nobody thought to watch who turns out to have been watching everything. It is always the one who steps forward, when stepping forward costs everything, and everyone else is standing still. The woman who had been invisible became the person the ranch could not run without, and the man who had nearly died because he had failed to see her spent the rest of his days making certain that she was never invisible again. Not on his property, not in his presence, not in any room where her voice and her mind and her judgment had something to offer, which was every room she walked into. That was not a small thing. In a world that had spent her entire life telling Lillian Brooks that she was too heavy and too quiet and too ordinary to matter, it was everything. And the life she built from that morning forward, built on her own terms in her own name, seen and known and valued for exactly who she was, proved something that the people who had looked through her for years would spend a long time reckoning with. The ones who get overlooked are not invisible because they have nothing to offer. They are overlooked because the people around them are not paying attention. And sometimes it takes a stagecoach on a mountain road and a woman with shaking legs and absolute clarity in her heart to remind the world of what it has been failing to see. Lillian Brooks had stood in that road and spread her arms and refused to move. And because she did everything that followed was possible. That was the truth of it, simple and complete, and not requiring a single word more.